Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. We'll get to today's episode, but first, thanks to our sponsors, the Art of Leadership Academy and BELAY. If you've ever thought you need more people in your corner, you've got to check out the Art of Leadership Academy. In it, you'll find a network of over 1,300 top church leaders from across the country and around the world in your corner who are ready to coach you. And I'm there to coach you too. All my premium content, monthly team training, and so much more inside the Academy. And it's all for less than the price of a conference, a course, or anything else you could possibly find. Check it out at theartofleadershipacademy.com. And again, I run into leaders who don't know who to hire and can't find the right people. That's where BELAY provides such value. They'll do a free 20-minute consultation with you. I turn to BELAY again and again for staffing, and they are the staffing solution I trust. So to book your free staffing solution, go to belaysolutions.com/Carey, and you'll get a 20-minute session to help you figure out what you need. And at the end of today's podcast, they'll give you some free tips on how to delegate to an expert from BELAY. So make sure you watch for that. Check it out. And now to today's episode. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Carey, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, thanks for saying yes. And we have a good mutual friend in John Acuff. And when he made the introduction, I've been listening to your podcast and like a lot of other people watching your work for years. So it's a thrill to have this conversation. And I want to go back to sort of the early days, your teenage years. You're best known for your work in television and on movies, but you started managing bands in high school. So I believe there's a connection to your dad with that. I know a lot of musicians, a lot of teenagers want to play in bands, but managing a band, that's a little bit different. So do you want to take us back to that time and what fueled that?
I'm happy to talk about it. You know, I'm 56 years old and I was doing the stuff you're talking about from 13 to 16. So it's funny when we think about the various versions of ourselves and the sort of things we were certain about at various times. I really, what I enjoy about that is it forces me to reckon with the fact that the things I'm certain about now, in 5 years, I might not really relate to or understand. And in fact, my certainty about whatever the path is, I should be really open to the fact that I could learn something entirely new tomorrow and change gears. So, but I'm one of those lucky people. I have a wonderful relationship with my father, and I always have had a wonderful relationship with my father. And he's older now, and I'm spending a lot of time with him lately, and with my kids too. And I was telling my kids that the amount of time when I think about my dad and my childhood, kind of the first thing I think of is the sound baseball makes when it hits a mitt, because of all the hours that he spent throwing and catching with me. And he was my hero as a kid, you know, and he was an executive. He was really a music publisher and a record producer. And a lot of the way we spent time was listening to music. He was really hands-on. He became more of an executive later, but he was really hands-on in that, all versions of that process. And he would come home with like just bags of cassette tapes. And from when I was really young, he and my mom treated me like someone who could process information like a grown-up could. I had really severe ADHD. I had a really difficult time executing alongside my classmates on their schedule with lots of the schoolwork stuff. But somehow when I was fascinated by something, when something was really compelling, I could throw my whole self into it and I could really achieve a lot. And I think my folks were certainly like anyone would be, especially back then when no one knew what ADHD was. I think they were pretty concerned about how it would all turn out regarding things like school. But because I had these interests in other things, one of which was music, they were in. But I wasn't a musician back then. Now I spend a lot of time writing songs and playing guitar. But back then, I just understood, I think in a way that was kind of beyond my years, just because of the hours. I'd probably spent so many hours critically listening to songs from the age of 6 to 13 that it was like I had a 25-year-old's kind of knowledge base. And so when I saw a kid in my high school or my junior high school who was really good at playing music, I immediately thought like, well, there's this club nearby, and I bet you I could get the guy who owns the club to let my friend play with his band at lunch, like at noon on a Saturday before the bands play at night. And it was a way to get into that club and go see bands at night. And I somehow just kind of everything I'd picked up about how the business worked from listening to my dad's phone calls and listening to records with him and tapes. I just went to my friend and I was like, if I can, well, the first thing was the principal wouldn't let my friend play at he didn't want rock music at like a school assembly. And
right.
I said to my friend, I was like, I bet you I could convince the principal. And I went and like made a whole presentation and got the thing. And then it was like, well, I bet I could get us into this club at lunchtime. And so I just started. It wasn't like to make any money. I mean, I definitely lost money making posters for like the afternoon thing, but it was incredible to just sort of like be able to then enter the world where I grew up. The drinking age was still 18 then. And so I couldn't go to, there was no other way I could go see the music, but by getting to know this club owner and then some of the bands that were just bubbling under to where they were going to be able to play at the clubs, I was able to go to these places and watch music. I would roadie, like very light roadie work as a 14-year-old, not much I could carry, but I would help load in. Like I would take the guitars. And as a result of that, I got to go hang out at these clubs, bars really. And I wasn't a drinker. I've never really been a drinker. I'm not a teetotaler. I'm not in a program, but I'm just never been a big drinker. So there was kind of no danger in hanging around other than what I would see or over here, which was plenty. But it was an amazing experience. I mean, so much of what you do when you're young, Carey, isn't well thought out, or I could try to put reasons on it. But the truth is you're going by like your instincts and desires and abilities. And I was just naturally drawn to all that. And they were very valuable experiences for me because when you're a kid who's not succeeding in school, but everyone's telling you you're a bright person and you should be, you're an underachiever. You love reading. I loved to read, but I couldn't read certain school books because of the way my brain was built. It was like they were radioactive, but there were things I loved. And then to have a thing that I could call my own and really manifest and do was so meaningful. And it made me have a sense that, okay, if I follow my curiosities and enthusiasms, maybe I can like find a path, even if it's not as traditional a path,
It's interesting now, and regular listeners of this podcast will know I'm picking up on a theme already. We're 550 episodes in. We've been doing this for a few years like you have with your show, Brian. And the number of people who've done significant things with their life who look back at their childhood and they have ADHD or dyslexia, but ADHD comes up more than almost any other quote disorder. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's work in David and Goliath, where he makes the argument of dyslexia that people like Richard Branson succeeded because of their dyslexia, not in spite of it. So how did you, because I think, statistically, if it's a leadership podcast, I probably have ADD that has been not diagnosed, but by friends who are medical physicians, they're like, yeah, you definitely have it. What did that look like for you? And how did you learn the workaround ADD or ADHD?
It was really, what it looked like was failure. Right. I mean, what it looked like was not being able to do the work and being told that I was lazy and undisciplined. And what it felt like was, what it felt like to me was an inner sense of doom that I couldn't do the very simple things that everybody else could do. And it manifested in all sorts of different areas. But cleaning my room was an impossibility. Organizing my albums, no chance. And really, what drove me crazy was I was fascinated. I've always been fascinated with words. I always loved to read books that were way beyond my grade level. And, but it wasn't just that I didn't want to read the dry history book. I swear to you, it was like The book was radioactive and it was keeping me away. And it's a thing that people with real ADHD understand. You want to be able to do the thing and you are unable to. And look, the workaround for me, I was lucky in many ways. I was lucky that I came from an economically solid background. My parents were able to provide for us. So I didn't worry about, I didn't have to get a job when I was in middle school or high school. I could do what I wanted to. I didn't have to pay my own way through college, which to me is the biggest blessing in the world, is if your family can pay for college. So you get out of college with no debt. I was also verbally gifted. So I had certain things that were really fortunate, right? The stories I told you, I was at 13 able to walk into rooms of grownups away from a school environment. And for whatever reason, I had really very good skill set at like being able to lock in, focus, listen to a decision maker, and influence that person, because I would have done the thing I was fascinated by, compelled by. I was able to go all the way in on this hyper focus thing that happens. When I would read a book I liked, you could basically hit me on the head and with a baseball bat, and I wouldn't even notice you because I was had disappeared into the work, right? And so it's not so much that I found a workaround; it's that I found a way to work through. I just found a way to take myself out of caring about being judged or letting those judgments of those institutions render any kind of final verdict on me, because I was doing something always that was outside of it, that interested me enough that it fueled me and kept me going. Also, I had understanding parents, meaning they were scared, and I would get in trouble. I would get in trouble, and lose phone privileges and lose going out. I mean, all that stuff. My parents cared and were actively trying to make sure that because there was no diagnosis of that back then, there was no medicine back then, and there wasn't even a therapeutic model that didn't include medicine. It was just like, hey, dude, do the work. Don't be so lazy. Don't be disruptive. So, and it was very painful at many stops along the way, but also my mother was really determined to convince me that I was bright and that this wouldn't matter. And as sort of frightened as I know she must have been by what teachers in the schools said, she was kind of undaunted in telling me that I would find things that I really would want to work on, and that I was smart enough to be able to pull any of that stuff off. And what that led to was when I wanted to get into college, and my grades were really bad. I'm sure my standardized scores were fine, fully competitive with the college I wanted to get to. But and this is the kind of thing I would do before people did this kind of thing. I remember going to college to be interviewed, and they tell you, follow up. But I didn't just follow up. I would write the person and call the person, and I would ask to come visit again, and I would send things, in 10th grade, I produced a song on an album that got put out. And I remember I kind of was building the case because I knew I wanted to go to this college. And I remember kind of building the case that I wouldn't contribute in normal, ordinary ways. And I might not on paper be the kind of student who seemed like this, but that if they took a chance on me, I would reward them in some way. And, years later, when all this good stuff happened, I reached out to that person and thanked them, because, had I not gone to Tufts, certain things wouldn't have happened. And that person and I still follow each other on Facebook. I made a real connection with this person, and I really made the kind of appeal. I guess people make these packages now, but because I knew I couldn't succeed in the channels that everyone else succeeded, and because I had supportive parents and a safety net on some level, I would just try different channels. And I just kept doing that my whole life, basically. Much later, I got diagnosed, and I was able to get medicine. And I find that to be incredibly helpful at times and in certain ways. because the challenges the other ways are so hard. But I just kept moving, you know?
It's interesting, you know, a little bit of my life was flashing before my eyes too. I'm reading a book right now that's rather academic, and I'm really having trouble accessing it. Like, I think you're right. Certain books are radioactive, like you can't touch it. Others you just get lost in, and they're such a beautiful, easy read. And there's certain things, you know, it almost feels, and I don't want to like put an analysis on your life that might be premature or incomplete. But I think a lot of us who struggle in traditional areas maybe just find workarounds. Do you know what I mean? So the club at 14 and this musician is a workaround. Well, maybe I can't do so well at math, or maybe English isn't my strong suit, but man, I can negotiate. You know, you end up at law school, which is really impressive. I mean, that's not easy.
And I would say like that's all correct. But the biggest, most painful thing that took me so many years to figure out was that it was really hard for me to finish papers. And I'm a writer, and I was always like, if I really would have, you add the things up that I was so really, that grabbed me. I mean, when I talk about reading and I would memorize movies and know all the dialogue, and I could always write 2 paragraphs that would knock your socks off, but I couldn't finish anything. And that was really the worst of it to me, was I just could not organize and I could not finish. And knowing that makes you not even start, right? If you know that you're going to be defeated because you can't finish, it's really difficult to start and then do that to yourself again and make you disappoint yourself again. I guess that's what it felt like to me, constant disappointment in myself, which is a really disempowering way to live. And it's, I can look back now, and of course, like I have found, I live a really fulfilling life, but I'm never that far from what it felt like. And so I don't want to be glib about it and make it like it was easy. I mean, it was painful, you know, and it was, because if anyone's listening, like I understand. At the time, you know, those things they felt like escapes, right? They felt like mini escapes. There was no plan like, oh, there's going to be a career. Like there was a plan with getting into college, but it was born out of desperation. It was born out of, I want to try to be around really smart people. How am I going to do that? When my grades don't announce myself in that way at all. And law school was really about a series of things, but one of which was just trying to, again, this is before an official diagnosis. I think I'd started to maybe read books on ADHD. But once I was there, I really did want to find a way. I was older, to train myself to get this work done, you know? Yeah, that stuff was always, it was really a battle.
But what's fascinating to me is you did have some success early on. I mean, whether it was that nightclub when you were in junior high or, you know, meeting Eddie Murphy very early in his career. I think he was already on Saturday Night Live. If I've got the story right, you helped negotiate his first comedy album, first couple. And then Tracy Chapman, when you were at Tufts, was that at Tufts or law school that you met Tracy Chapman? Tufts. Yeah, tell us about that, because I mean, again, it's really things
from a long time ago. But yeah, look, I mean, that's part of part of what would happen was that I made a decision to kind of follow whatever I was curious about, and yeah, through this nightclub that I was booking concerts at, I then became friendly with the owner of that club, and Eddie Murphy was performing there, and yeah, he was a featured player on SNL, and he was so great. It's a long story, but I don't want to take the whole podcast up with it. But I snuck backstage, and I met Eddie and his manager, and I said, "You should be making an album," and they hadn't thought about doing that, and I talked them through why, or they might have thought about it, but they hadn't done anything on it. And then I woke my father up when I got home, and I was like, "You got to meet these people," and I'd gotten all their information and connected them, and then they made a deal, and my dad made the first 3 Eddie Murphy albums that were enormously successful. And for sure that happened because I went back and did that. So that's the way that happened. And well, in college, it's a much longer story, but that's an example where in college I was, one of the people leading the movement against apartheid and for divestment. It was social justice movement, not in the way that it's necessarily defined now, but Elaine Pagels. Like I remember reading Elaine Pagels in this class I was in about social justice. I mean, this is in the 80s with this reverend named Reverend Graylin Hagler, and getting him to come speak at this event. And we were doing an all-campus event to promote this idea that the school should divest from investing in companies doing business in apartheid South Africa. And a friend said that I should go. There was this folk singer on campus I should get to play at this rally, and that was Tracy Chapman. And I ended up working with Tracy and producing her demos, and my dad and I got her first record deal, and that was with Fast Car, and that. So there were markers along the way that supported my mother's belief that I wasn't going to end up, never fulfilling, my desires to make some kind of a mark. But none of that was really, and that was, look, helping Tracy get that music to the world is one of the greatest things I'll ever do, no matter what. But that was her art, her work. I was a conduit. But shortly thereafter, that became less satisfying to me, and
you had a moment, didn't you, Brian? Does that involve the Counting Crows demo? Was that
there were a couple of them? Yeah, there were a couple of those moments, but I told this story to Adam Duritz, who, of Counting Crows, on my podcast, and we're pretty friendly now. And I loved music so much; it was so important to me, and I cared about it so much. But when I was in the record industry, I'd realized, and it crystallized that this love I had for it stopped being as pure. And when that happened was somebody played me a demo of Round Here, the first song on August and Everything After. And I mean, just when I heard those lyrics and him singing, I immediately knew how big it would be. But I remember what I felt was, instead of what I'd felt my whole life, which is, I want to proselytize. I want to call all my friends. I want to get everybody to know. Instead, I felt anger and jealousy that I wasn't the one who'd found it, that this guy I knew, this guy I knew had the tape, and he said some other people who were in the, A&R talent scouting thing had found it. But what was great for me was I felt that emotion, and then I didn't give in to it. I checked in. I kind of checked in on it, and I knew that was a troubling sign as to where I was in my life. And
at that point, you were in A&R, right? You were in the music.
Yeah, I was in A&R, and I was doing that, and that was I figured what I would do. But a bunch of different moments add up where I realized this work wasn't making me happy for a variety of reasons. But really, what happened was Amy and my first child was born, and shortly after Sam was born, I found myself in my office. I had gone 29 years of my life without ever smoking a cigarette. And suddenly I was so unhappy with this stack of demo tapes I was supposed to listen to in this office job. And it was a good job, and I was, doing well. But I was smoking cigarettes, and I was eating a double cheeseburger late at night, staring at this box of tapes I was supposed to listen to. And suddenly it occurred to me. I was also, during this time period, often getting up in the middle of the night, and I would start writing the beginnings of stories or the beginnings of scenes, screenplay scenes, and I would never kind of look at it again, and I would never finish. Yeah. I was sitting in this office, and I was thinking about our, 4 or 5 month old son. And I realized that if I allowed myself to stay a blocked writer, I had this thought that if I allowed the creative impulse in me to die, if I allowed being blocked to win, that if this creative impulse died, it would be like any other kind of death, and it would have toxicity to it. And that toxicity would ooze out of me onto the people I loved, because I would turn bitter, I would turn angry, I would turn my self-recriminations into not really being the kind of parent or husband I wanted to be, or human I wanted to be. And I knew I had to find a way suddenly to become an artist, not to become someone near artists. And I had to become a storyteller. All my friends were writers, or most of them were. I cared more about all that than anything except my family. And I went to my best friend, my lifelong best friend, David Levien. He was tending bar across town. And he gave me Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. I said, look, I got to do this. And he said, I'll write a script with you. We'll do this together. Because he'd been wanting to do the same thing, and he'd started to. And he said, but read this book, do the exercises. And he gave me The Artist's Way. And I began doing the art. And my wife and Amy had always said to me for years, we got married young, and she had always said, like, you're meant to do more than what you're doing, and you should do all these things. And and I came home, and I remember saying to her, and she said, I'm going to clean out the storage space underneath our apartment, and that's going to be your writing office. And she did it the next day. And we had this, young baby at home, and she still said, like, this is right. And so Dave gave me Artist's Way. I started doing the exercises. And as soon as I started doing the morning pages and the artist dates and taking the walks and realizing a bunch of stuff about why I felt I could never become this, everything opened up. And shortly thereafter, I walked into a poker club at night because I was playing a lot of poker. And a friend of mine told me about this underground poker club. And I walked in and, called Levien in the middle of the night. And I was like, I know what we're making our first script about. And we started meeting up and wrote the first script. And that script became, Rounders. And so once I made the decision, and that had a lot of rejection, but once I made that decision, and look, one of the things about people with ADHD that's really proven and studied is when you're on a team, you're much better. And so because I had to show up with David, and he was going to show up every day and do this work, I was going to show up every day and do this work. And he was amazing at keeping me kind of anchored a little bit and anchored enough to together get there and be able to write this thing. And we worked that way for a number of years. And then finally, I figured this stuff out for myself, and ended up finding a psychiatrist who helped really diagnose it and figure out how to treat it. And then I was able to start really being able to write, still always with David in that we make all the stuff together, but I was able to write a script alone that we then directed together with Michael Douglas in it. And it through all this work, I've been mostly able to manage my state and the attention issues.
Well, it's interesting because you say on the one hand, it's hard to focus. On the other hand, you can get hyper-focused. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. And that was one of my questions. I'm far from the cinematic world. I've always been fascinated by movies. I love them, but I rewatched Rounders getting ready for this, along with Ocean's 13 and others. And the gift, the superpower that amazes me, like Rounders, I mean, I don't really play cards. I sort of do, just with friends or whatever. But the amount of technical knowledge, like you immerse yourself in a world, whether that's Billions, whether that's Ocean's 13, whether that's Rounders. I mean,
yes.
A card player, like the best on the planet, has to watch that movie and say, this guy gets it. How do you do that kind of like immersion or research?
Well, that
into
comes
a
from
subject?
I mean, it sounds so. Like I'd say, if you're listening to this, I mean, this is one of those words, like, unfortunately, the word passion has kind of lost all meaning because it's overused. Yeah. And I don't know what it stands in for. It kind of stands in for like these but when I talk about, like, I had such a fanatical passion for what it meant to be a poker player and like the way poker players communicated and what they thought about when they were playing cards. And I was so curious about how they lived their lives, like imagining that someone just shows up with like their cash and a little gangster roll of, cash, rolled together like in Goodfellas or something. And they show up and live their lives by sitting at a poker table across from someone. Like, it was so unbelievably fascinating to me that all I wanted to do was think about it, learn more about it, and read more about it, to the exclusion of like everything else, though. I mean, that's what happens, right? So maybe someone would read 5 poker books. I read 100 poker books. Like I became friends with this guy who there was a bookstore called the Gambler's Bookshop outside of Vegas. And back then there was no internet. Like you'd find the advertisement in a magazine, Card Player magazine. And I would write a letter to him or I would call the guy. His name was Chuck. I mean, I still very distantly know him, and his name was Chuck Weinstock. And I would like call him and be like, any new poker books coming in or by these, and he would send me, I would buy all these poker books, $6 for this one, $9 for this one, 11. I remember, and Amy again was just like, yeah, whatever you have to do for this, And I would read all these books and with a pen, and I would find these interesting words or these interesting, what happens is it doesn't feel like, this is the gift of ADHD. The gift is when you are working on one of the things that grabs you, it doesn't feel like work. Writing, rewriting, editing, those things there's pressure. So it's work. But when I'm editing, when I'm editing the show, not editing on paper, like editing the footage with an editor, I'm lost in that process. I'm taken over by that process. And so that's the gift of it, where that part of it, the hours spent solving those problems, I get energized by that, So, yeah, those details, it was so important. We were so obsessive, David and I together, the two of us were really, again, obsessed is another word that kind of loses meaning, but we never didn't meet. We met every single morning, and before work, he would come back from tending bar, and it was before I would go off to work, and we meet so early in the morning, and we work for 2 solid hours, sometimes 2.5, and we were so focused on what we were trying to do. And every single word in that thing mattered, and getting every poker scene right to the extent of our abilities mattered so much. We really did feel like characters in a Springsteen song, like putting it all on the line, and it was probably in a hopeless effort, but we didn't care. We just had to do it. And look, I still spend every day with Dave, and we're still, I'm still spend every night with my wife, like the same person and those same kids. So that part of my life has stayed incredibly solid and the same. And I'm still totally focused on those things in a joyous way.
I want to come back to your partnership because I think that's remarkable for it to have lasted basically an entire lifetime. But, if I understand right, you did a great interview with Jon Acuff on his first podcast, The Creative Slide, which we'll link to. It's still up there, which I'm grateful for. It was a great interview. He's got a new podcast now called All It Takes Is a Goal. But I seem to remember, was this a side hustle for you, writing rounders? Like you had your day job and then you'd get together, or did you quit your day job and then?
No, I didn't. This goes really in line with a lot of what Acuff talks about. But no, that's what I'm saying. No, nobody was using the term side hustle then. But I think if you were not, I do think if you were doing some kind of artistic endeavor, some people might have that bolt of lightning moment and decide they're going to throw everything else away. But I had a child, and I knew we were going to have another child. So I just decided to expand my day, basically. I was just going to, but doing it first in the day. It made the drudgery of my job much less, because the day would start with the thing and it was very hard writing the first thing. You don't know what you're doing and you're just trying so hard and you're failing most of the time. But I felt so alive, Carey, I was working from the better way to say it. I was working from the most alive part of myself. And because of that, then when I would have to go to meetings and stuff, conference rooms, it didn't matter to me because I had already done this thing where I was working from this really alive place. And I think mornings, even though people always talk about it on podcasts, and it's another cliched thing. And I'm not one of those people who's the super achiever, my morning has, one of these guys selling a lot of stuff. But I meditate and I do morning pages every day. And it does start, and I exercise every day. And those things I would say are also really part of the way as an adult I've tried to handle these things as if I meditate every day, and if I can journal, and if I can exercise, and look, on some days maybe I got the newest COVID booster, so today I'm just walking. But most days I do pretty rigorous exercise. But I do something I'll walk probably 5 miles outside today as just a casual to do something. And I don't know, doing those things really, it really helps. So the morning, getting to do a thing in the morning that kind of sets me right for the day is really, really valuable. And it started back then, I think, because we would do that work. And then that just kind of set me up to succeed the rest of the day, whether or not that thing was going to happen and become objectively successful.
So I think a lot of the audience would know Rounders. I mean, it had Matt Damon, Edward Norton, John Turturro, Gretchen Mol. I mean, really
John
stellar
Malkovich,
cast. John Malkovich, yeah. I mean, it was a killer movie, and it did very, very well, particularly in the last 20 years. It had a decent opening, but it's just become almost cult-like, right?
Well, correct. And that was a real gift in a certain way that it didn't, the movie came out and it didn't do that well in the box office, but within a year. So we had this moment of having to take stock and figure out like, well, why are we doing this? Like, are we doing it because we wanted some kind of success no, we're doing it because we love doing this. And we're going to, so that like the weekend that it was coming out, we were already somewhere researching our next movie and working on the next thing. And we never stopped. And then watching the way that the work got received 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, I would watch critics who dinged it when it came out, 10 years later, write a review about something else and then say like in the classic Rounders. And I was like, but dude, you didn't like that movie 10 years ago. But it made me put so much stuff in perspective and kind of reaffirmed that Dave and I have to be the only kind of inner authority on what we're doing, and that we can't kind of like give that power to any other entity, whether it's a buyer or whether it's a critic or whether it's an audience. You don't want to be self-indulgent. You want to serve the audience, but the only way it works for us is to imagine the audience is us and then just entertain ourselves and then have the faith that ultimately that audience will find the piece. And, now 25 years later of doing this work, we've proven that out for us. There is a group of people. It's not the biggest group of people, but it's not the smallest group of people who really care about the work that we do. And that is something Seth always talks about. You don't need the biggest audience in the world. You just need an audience that loves what you do and that relates to what you do. And if you don't break the compact with that audience, if they don't sense that you're gaming them or you're trying to do something else, but they know you're doing what you do for the same reasons, you're probably not going to lose that audience. You're probably going to grow it.
For the budding artists, leaders whose stuff hasn't been taken up yet or caught fire yet, how did Rounders get made? It wasn't an automatic thing, was it?
No, we dealt with a lot of rejection. It's funny. I had Neil Blumenthal, who founded and is the CEO of Warby Parker, on my podcast this week. And he was telling me this great story of their first big pitch, and they just got destroyed by a person they most wanted. And the person was a billionaire and super good at this premium brand thing. And he just destroyed them, basically said, this isn't going to work. And here's why. And you basically should give up. And I was so interested in what he did when he walked away from that meeting with his partners, because I'm always thinking about how we keep going as human beings, as human beings who try to be artists or who try to put pieces of themselves out there, and how rough rejection can be and how much it hurts. And learning how to absorb that blow and then disambiguate and figure out, well, okay, what 3 things are valid? Is there anything valid in the critique? If you can get away from the emotional reaction, so breathe, take long enough. If you can find something of value to make the thing better, great. If you can't, dismiss it and just keep moving forward. And so I got this lesson really early on because all these agencies rejected Rounders. I wrote down what they all said. One said it was overwritten. One said it was underwritten. Neither of those terms have any meaning. They didn't then or now. All these kinds of things. Then a young manager got it to a young producer's kind of like the most junior producer in an office. And that person got it to their boss. And they brought it to Miramax, and Miramax bought the thing. And the next day after Miramax bought it, like all the same agents who passed were all on our phone sheet. And I just read all of them, their reasons for rejecting us. And because the rejections hurt so much because it was the first time. And they all had all these BS excuses. Oh, well, I was my assistant who read it, or I was having a bad day, or I read the wrong draft. I mean, all these lies. And it just made me realize like, oh, right, these are lemmings. They're going to follow this thing. I can't think that yes, and you need to work with these conduits, and you want to pick the smartest one or the one you think has the best instinct but what you can't do is imbue them with qualities of discernment that they don't actually have. And that doesn't mean cluelessly going like, I'm right, all these people are wrong, right? It doesn't mean insisting that you're a genius. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is, don't give them more power than they have. And find a way to be objective about your own material and keep trying to make it better and keep writing the next thing and keep developing the next. I didn't stop. As we were getting rejected, we were already writing the next thing. And that's the thing, right? Keep controlling what you can control, and don't give more power than is true to the various forces along the way that you can't control.
I appreciate you taking so much time on the deep dive of origins. We have a lot of young leaders listening, so I think they're going to take a lot of inspiration from that. I do want to shift a little bit and talk about Amy Edmondson from Harvard, had her on, and she talked about complex leadership and used the example of a movie set or healthcare institution. So, I have a heart attack today. I end up in ER. And there's a team of doctors, whoever's on call, the doctors, the nurses, the assistants, all those people come together to do life-saving surgery. It's quite an extraordinary feat of leadership. But movies are probably similar. Like with Billions or Super Pumped, your latest project, you probably get to build your own team. And I'd like to talk about that. But when you're coming together to do a movie that might take, 3 months to 8 months to make, you're pulling this team of people, most of whom you don't know, together. What are some of the keys to success, from, talent, actors, to producers, to key grips? Like, it's a masterful thing to pull together, Brian.
Let me just first say, people in my industry, me include all of us, definitely like at times feel like we're saving. We work so hard and like, it all feels so important. It's almost like we're saving lives. But can I just be clear that we're not? The doctors you're talking about, the healthcare people, there's no similarity. I mean, what they have to do and what we're doing. Enough. I mean, we're making up stories for a living. That's what we're doing. We're trying to we're making up stories. Like, I just want to be really super clear. We're making up stories. Fair. Look, I mean, I think I'm demonstrating too, like, one of the things is perspective, right? What is a leader? A leader has to keep perspective for the organization. And a leader, first of all, I'm always asking leaders what they do. There are experts on leadership, and I am not an expert on leadership. I'm just someone who tries to do the best that he can with his partner and a great team. The best answer I can give is it's about perspective and mission and tone. And when you're trying to do artistic work with a big group of people, you are hope that you can share what the tone and the vision and the mission for the piece is. Keep perspective on its place in the world, and then allow the people you're working with to come up with their best ideas, and then enlist them in understanding that ultimately you're going to be the person who, because of what the piece is, decides on which of those ideas is going to get folded into the thing. As far as like hiring grips and gaffers, those people are so important in a way that it would take me days to explain. But the key is you hire a key grip and a gaffer who run their departments, and you talk to them all the time, and you build relationships with them, and you try to do what I'm talking about with them, and you have line producers. I mean, making a long running series, yes, there's the cast stays the same over the whole thing. And on Billions, we've kept much of our crew together, but I've talked to a lot of coaches about this, and it is similar to a coach trying to get a team prepared to play and win, that's what you're doing. I mean, most of it. Also, the other thing is, the first couple of years of Billions, I mean, Levien and I were on set from before anyone else till like, we would just show up. If call time was 7, Dave and I were there at 6:30. Not to make a big show of it either. It's just like, well, we're going to get there because we want to know and we want to be part of it and we want to learn and we want to answer any questions that people have. I mean, I can't tell you that in season 6 or 5, we're now coming up on 7. I'm there every morning at 6:30, but I'm still there a lot of the time at the beginning of the day. Being around and being a part of the process. And then when you find stars, I don't mean actor stars, we've had a number of assistants who've become producers and writers on the show. And so that's another way, right? You bring enough people up in the system and they carry the message of what the vision is and the perspective and the mission. But I want to, all of that is like, Dave and I are just trying to tell our stories in a compelling way. And we're dealing with the actors all the time, and we are the ultimate sort of creative authority on the piece. But we're surrounded by wonderful people. And maybe years from now, I'll be able to sort of like codify the lessons I've learned and how to do all of this. Yeah. But I still don't feel like an authority in any way on leadership. I mean, every day I'm just trying to get better at figuring all that stuff out to the best of my ability,
I can imagine, particularly when you write a screenplay for a 2-hour movie, say, that you must, and maybe I'm wrong, but you must have a picture of what the film is going to look like in your head when you're writing it. And I think for a lot of us who produce content, whether that's sermon, whether that's a book, whether that's whatever we're working on, we have a picture in our head of what it looks like. But then you get hundreds of people involved in a feature film. And I imagine at times there are healthy debates about whether it should go this way, or script changes, or perhaps sometimes it turns out very differently. How do you handle that? How do you tackle that as a creator?
Look, you're in different roles and different things. So that's the biggest part of what you're doing is protecting all that. And you engage in these conversations. I think directness is really useful, but figuring out how to be direct and pleasant at the same time, and how to be direct and funny, how to be direct and empathetic, right? How to be direct and a good listener. So like all that stuff is part of how it works. Also in my business, there's just not really one answer. Look, anytime, I would say one way to think about it is, anytime you have an idea that starts as kind of a feeling, like a sermon would, a speech, there's a feeling, there's an idea, but that idea is kind of twinned with a feeling. And often, once you start to work it, you sense something's getting lost in the translation, and it's very difficult to reconcile those things. But you can't let that stop you. You got to go through and write the first draft of it, or put the first piece of it together, and then keep at it. Like, I would say one of the things David and I do really well is that we are incredibly rigorous about the final product we deliver. We're going to continue to question ourselves. That's one thing for sure about leadership, which is like, I am constantly questioning my own work. Not in an insecure way, not in a self-doubting way. Right. I'm not doubting, I'm questioning. Those are really different things. I'm just interrogating the work to make sure it's as strong as it can be. I'm not doubting it so that I'm thinking the whole foundation is going to crumble. But that kind of questioning allows you to go, is this as strong as it can be? What if these scenes were in a different order? What if this line was better? Right. What if this joke moved here? You're constantly looking at those things with the eye toward making it stronger,
One of the things you have to manage is great talent. You've had the privilege of working with some of the biggest names in the industry. Ocean's 13, that was an all-star cast. There's a couple of elements, I imagine, because were you involved in Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 12, or you came along and just wrote Ocean's 13?
No, we worked on 13, wrote it, and we were on set every day with the director, Steven Soderbergh. And that was a lot of pressure, and that was a lot of, you had to do a lot of, if that didn't work, it was all just going to fall on us because like everyone else is great at what they do. So if that didn't get, it was just going to be on us, No, that was an incredible gift. I mean, being on that set. And that I'll say like, because we'd had this long relationship with Matt Damon, because he was in our first movie, between Matt and Steven Soderbergh, who we worked very closely with Steven on the script, entering that world was not just painless, it was really joyous because Matt put his literal, not just like sort of said, I mean, I remember showing up like the first or second day, Matt was there and he came running up and put his arms around the two of us and walked us into kind of where everybody else was and was like, these are my guys, these are my brothers. And like that gesture from Matt just immediately brought us into the whole thing and brought us on the inside, and it was very valuable to us.
That scene, I think George Clooney is watching Oprah and and Brad Pitt walks in. I mean, that's got to be that was such a powerful scene and such a break from the movie, right? Where did that come from? I was rewatching it the other night. That's just David. I mean, that's one of the best things about getting to do this with your lifelong best friend is like, I mean, that's just those two guys were just the cool version of me and Dave in that moment. And I remember, I mean, that happened, I was watching Oprah and probably crying and Dave walked in but if you're a writer, you kind of remember those things. And so I remember pitching that to Steven Soderbergh saying, we have this notion that this thing, and he thought it was hilarious. And I think Brad and George knew that they were doing some version of us. And I remember being over in the corner of that room where watching the monitors and rehearsing with Brad and George and just looking at Levien, like, how is this our lives? We were young too, man. We were in our 30s, maybe I just turned 40 or something, but we were shooting it. And I just remember looking at him and just thinking, this is crazy. That's Clooney and Brad. And they're basically just literally acting out a thing that happened with the two of us. It was great. And they were amazingly kind to us too. I'm sure they were. Talk about your pretty much going back to elementary school or high school relationship with David Levien.
That's Dave and I have podcasted together. I mean, it's like, look, he's, David is, as just the best person I know and incredibly loyal and smart. And we really have been best friends since we were 14 and 15 years old. And so, I mean, we've just been there through the birth of our children and our marriages and deaths of people and all the things. And so it doesn't feel like he's my work partner. He is. We're work partners, but he's really my brother. And it's the benefit of having a brother without having any of the interfamily squabbles because we weren't trying to get the attention of the same parents, so we don't have any of the normal sort of problems that real brothers have because we chose this. And I mean, we have a lot of weirds, like our wives were born. We found this out later, but we were driving, Amy and I were just married and we were driving with David and Melissa. They had just started dating or they'd gotten serious. And so we were taking a trip together, like for a weekend somewhere. And one of our wives said her birthday. Melissa said her birthday. And we were like, what year? And David's wife and my wife were basically born at the same minute.
That's crazy.
We met them and married them completely separate times. They were born like at the same minute. It's weird.
That's bizarre. What have been some keys? Like, you hear of people, oh yeah, we wrote together for 5 years and then it didn't work out, or we had a difference of opinion and went another way. What has kept the relationship alive and fresh all these years?
The answer is respect. Like literally respect from the littlest things to the biggest things, right? And the knowledge that all we're trying to do is make the work the best it can be, and that we are both working toward exactly the same goal. Also, man, we've had real professional lows together and real professional highs, and we're just in it together. Look, I used the word rigorous before. It's a really important word to me. And we're rigorous about truth with each other, and we're rigorous about loyalty. And all that stuff was tested long before we had a professional partnership. And so, there's never been a moment that we haven't been able to talk to each other about what's really going on. And, we pick up each other's burden when we have to. And, I would say this, we never keep score. And it's really important. And we keep scoring together as a team in the business. But with each other, we never keep score. You did this work. I did that work. Hey, I made those 3 phone calls. I'm never one time in 25 years of working together. I never thought of this before. I never thought of this idea of score. I'm glad,
That's
I
cool.
think it's really, I would advise that to anybody in a team. Make the choice. Don't keep score. I just assume everybody's doing the best that they can. That doesn't mean don't ever criticize the other person. It doesn't mean don't raise a hand and say, I need help. Hey, I need help doing this thing because I'm working on it and I need you to help solve it. Or actually, I banged my head against this. I can't. Can you do this when you have the? That's fine. But after that, it never once have either of us said, I did those 4 things. Where the hell were you? Never one time. And I think that's just, I think that makes each of us want to show up and do really do the thing. And look, Dave's incredibly generous of spirit. And I think each of us try to really always think that the other one has our best interests at heart. And so, I think in any relationship, marriage too, right? If you just frame everything your partner does, your marriage, your spouse, if you can remind yourself that your spouse is doing what they can for the best reasons, and you frame it that it's the best reasons, not the worst, that also goes a long way towards stopping sort of petty jealousies and slights and things like that.
So if you look at 2 of your biggest, most recent projects, Billions and Super Pump. So Super Pump tells the story of Uber and its rise and sort of an inside scoop. And then Billions, the hedge fund financial picture in New York. What drew you? You say you get obsessed with subjects, which is great, but what drew you to those 2 subjects as the stories that needed telling? I mean, Billions in particular has just exploded all over the place. It's a much watched series, well watched.
Again, I think this is it's a whole podcast, but the short answer would be, here's the truth, right? All the answers someone would give you are kind of intellectualizations of a process that's really not an intellectual process. It's about a kind of an alchemy. And I can tell you the things that David and I noticed in the world that made us want to write about these kinds of people. I can say that when we started working on it, it was very clear that it was going to be the kind of thing that had the capacity to be life-changing, and that it was the kind of thing that we could dive into for years and years and years and years. It asks questions that are very fundamental to modern civilization and to America right now. And so we'd certainly noticed long before Trump was even officially a candidate that qualities, certain external qualities, or I'd say characteristics like verbal acuity, charisma, a kind of charm, a kind of personal power, were standing in for qualities of character like humility and empathy and caring, and that Americans were celebrating just rich people for the sake that they were rich. And we were interested in looking at that, but there were a million different things and a million things we'd seen. And we'd noticed that prosecutors had king-like powers. And so we thought we could, and that billionaires were basically nation states. And that if we set a nation state against a king, we could have a kind of Shakespearean construct. And, it bore out.
Yeah, it really, really did. Well, you're right. There are podcasts upon podcasts here, but we're definitely pushing an hour, Brian. Let's talk about your diverse friendships. So Tim Ferriss is a good friend. Seth Godin is a good friend. Jon Acuff is a good friend. You've mentioned a dozen other people. You seem like a highly relational person, but they're not all, you can't just go talk shop, right? Like Acuff doesn't make movies and Seth doesn't make movies or TV shows. So what drives your What makes people interesting to you?
Well, all those people are writers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're all writers.
Yeah, that's true.
We're in the same. Yep. I think we're in the same business. We spend our lives. Those people, right? We all spend our lives writing and communicating.
That's true.
And trying to, all those people are looking at the world and filtering it through their prism and then creating work that reflects the world they see or the world that they want to see. I have incredibly high regard for each of those people. And yeah, all three of those people are people I've spent a good amount of time with away from this stuff. They're people I've had multiple dinners with. And Seth's truly one of my best friends. And, and John and Tim are each, Tim and I've been friends. All these people too are people I've been friends with now a long time. I think I met Seth in 2011, maybe 2012. And something like that, and Tim Tim I met right when the first book work week came out. So I would say it's, as you get older, it's harder to really make real friends. But I'm all, you find people along the way, and if you do, and if you have to invest yourself in it. You have to give. I've noticed that as an adults sometimes I can get in this rhythm. I bet you can because of what you do and your curiosity. Where it's very easy for me to sit at dinner and just ask questions for an hour of the other person. Mm-hmm. But what I've realized is, like, for someone to be a real friend, what you have to be willing to do is actually share what you're going through. You have to actually
mutuality to it. Right?
I'm having a bad day. And normally that's not, or I'm wrestling with something. Can I talk to you about it? And that's hard for men in particular as we get older, I think. But it's so valuable. Yeah. And so Seth and I do that all the time. I will, I'll go over to his place or he'll come to me and we'll talk. And now I would say, like, I've had some friends. My friend David Sigerson is one of my very best friends for almost 40 years now, and Levien, and I have these friendships are really important to me. I really value them, and I have high standards for my friends. I demand loyalty, and they demand it in return. But all three of those people you mentioned are just brilliant thinkers, and like I said, they're writers. So, and I'm also curious as you are. So, Seth in particular. Who better to talk to about how someone should market one of my shows than Seth Godin and workflow. Those people are experts on, Tim, and all three of those people are experts on workflow. And I will definitely talk to them all about that, about issues related to producing work on a schedule and how do you make appropriate demands on other people producing work on a schedule. And I'll, try to just engage and talk about all that stuff. And they're all funny too.
Yeah, they are. They're fun.
Acuff's hilarious.
Fun people. Acuff.
They're all good.
Honestly.
I'd say those are people who work hard to be good and are good and do good in the world. And like John and I obviously see aspects of the world entirely differently. But I was down in Nashville a few months ago, and John and Jenny took me to dinner. And we just had the best time laughing and talking and sharing our take on the world. And as different as we may see certain things, there's an essential humanity. And when you open yourself up to people without judging them, but you're like, hey, we're here and we laugh at a bunch of the same stuff. And isn't that wild that, you went to an evangelical college and that's the central thing in your life. And this, I have a very different belief system. And yet both of us can look at the same hypocrite on TV and laugh at that person together. And that's amazing,
Well, and that's what I love about this show. That's what I love about the relationships we get to cultivate. And that's what I love about your show too, your podcast, The Moment. You have just a hugely eclectic guest list.
I love it. I mean, it's a great way. I mean, that is, I've made friends that way. And it's what a great way to get to know somebody. I mean, when you've done this and spent an hour with somebody talking, you really do kind of know them in a way that it might take way longer to get to know them. Sort of if they were another parent at school of the kids and you were standing on the sidelines. You're up in Canada, I guess, while you're at the curling competition or something. But
I'm one of 6 Canadians who doesn't like hockey and has never played curling. But do you play curling? No, you curl. That's it. You curl.
Do you like? Hold on. Do you like Rush?
Oh yeah. Well, Neil Peart lives down the road, so I've listened to my share.
He lived down the road from you?
Yeah. It's funny.
He was a genius.
Died a few years ago, but
yeah, he was a genius. That guy.
The guy, yes. I think the guy who did the electrical in my house did Neil Peart's house, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I had Geddy Lee on I was saying I had Geddy Lee on the pod, and he was in New York and willing to come. And one of the strangest things growing up, I said, as you know, such a music fan and hard rock, and Geddy was so important to me. And I mean there are certain things, like as long as I've been doing this, and just I spend my life around such famous people that it doesn't mean anything. But that knock on the door at my apartment, my little on the west side, and then Geddy Lee was standing there. That was a really intense moment for me.
Surreal, right? What
I told him too. I mean, I just was like, "This is Geddy. You have to know. This is going to take me a second I'll be professional, but you got to give me like a minute and a half to be unprofessional, please, and then it'll all be great." And I text with him sometimes, and I can't. I'm so careful. About
we all have those people in our life that we're like, oh, should I send it? Should I not send it? Did I say that right? You check it with somebody.
I just am careful about how often. I'm just judicious in how often I initiate a back and forth with Geddy.
Understood.
Yeah,
understood. Brian, this has been a delight. Any final thought for leaders today?
My pleasure. You're really great. Wonderful to talk to, and thanks for asking such good questions.
You are too. Thank you so much, Brian.